Charles Harrington Elster is with us today. He's written a book called The Big Book of Beastly Mispronunciations, and it's filled with all sorts of tips on how to pronounce words properly, also the history of some words. So if you cringe when you hear words like data or coupons or rural route, we're going to find out how to pronounce those words properly today. Charlie, thanks so much for being with us on WHO.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Does it make you cringe when you hear mispronounced words just in normal conversation? I probably used a few myself in your introduction.
No, you were fine. But I do cringe, but I try not to cringe visibly. If I'm speaking with someone, it would be impolite to make funny faces or disparaging, look down my nose while someone else is speaking. I have two rules, by the way, about correcting people's pronunciation. Two very important rules. You should never interrupt the speaker, and you should make the correction in private if at all possible.
That's good.
And even more important, you should make sure you're right.
Okay.
I can't tell you how many people are victims of what I call erroneous correction. It's the pompous professor or neighbor or friend, coworker, or what have you, who on what authority?
Right.
On what authority says, "Oh no, I'm sorry, it's pronounced this way,"
Right.
and just squashes you like a bug. And later, when you consult someone like me, consult my book or consult several dictionaries, you'll find, hey, wait a minute, that person may know everything about X, but what does she know about pronunciation?
And we are going to open up the phone lines, even though, Charles, I have to tell you, we already had callers call in because this is a hot topic. People kind of get bugged by mispronunciations. So if you have a pet peeve word or if you have a question for our expert. And, Charlie, let me give you a couple of my pet peeves before we get to the callers, okay?
Okay, yep.
My biggest pet peeve probably in the whole world is temperature. Most news people say temperature. Most TV weathermen say temperature. It's not temperature. It's temperature.
Yeah, and they mispronounce it more often when things get hotter, right, and get you hot under the collar.
Another thing that bugs me is we have a senator, a U.S. senator, who talks about flying out from Washington. And
the intrusive R, they call that.
In our household, we joke because my one daughter likes to say coupons, and I think you say in the book it's coupons.
I do. That one bothers me. That's a pretty hearty mispronunciation, too, and I'll have to say that I should advise your listener that what I call a beastly mispronunciation may, in some cases, and in the case of coupon, it's true, be acknowledged in your dictionary.
Yeah.
Because it's the job of the dictionary not to pass judgment upon the language. That's the job of the language maven.
Interesting.
Someone like me, the prescriptivist.
So the dictionary may give us two pronunciations, but that doesn't mean that they're both proper.
Two or more. What it means is that they are both sufficiently common in the opinion of the editors, the lexicographers who make the dictionary, that any pronunciation you see in any given dictionary is sufficiently common in the opinion of the editors to warrant inclusion.
Get to the phone calls, and Sue is from Ames is up first. Hi, Sue.
Morning.
What's the word that bugs you?
Well, I have two. The first one is pronunciation.
Thank you for bringing that up. I can't tell you how many times I get calls on radio shows from people complaining about mispronunciation.
Okay.
There is no noun in pronunciation.
All right.
Well, the other one that gets me wild is congratulations.
Oh, yeah.
I just really hate that.
Charlie, how do you say that? Congratulations? Or
Yeah, there's put a ch in there for the T.
Well, it's a misspelling, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yes,
A D instead of a T.
The mispronunciation has occasionally yielded a misspelling as well, and that's a not uncommon phenomenon that I've been tracking.
Is that like
with
kindergarten?
certain words.
Like kindergarten?
Probably so, yeah.
Yeah.
Americans are inconsistent in pronouncing T, especially in the middle of words.
Yeah.
Whereas the Brits are more
Okay.
articulate about it. They will pronounce the name Martin. We swallow the T a little bit. They will say Martin.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Thanks for calling, Sue. We have another Sue from Urbandale on Michelson in the morning. Hi, Sue.
Hi.
What's the word that bugs you?
I want to make a comment about in the dictionary they will have the mispronunciation if it's commonly as well as the right way.
Like a slang type?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, not necessarily. many of the pronunciations that we will castigate on this show today, you will find in dictionaries, simply because, as I said a moment before, they are common among reasonably literate people. And the problem with that, in my opinion, is that the average user of a dictionary opens up that book and sees two or more pronunciations for a given word. There's no basis, no information given upon which to make a decision. At least dictionaries should use some kind of labeling system, and in certain cases they do, but often it's such an obscure symbol that people don't go to the front matter and figure out what it means, to show people that some pronunciations, even though they are common, are considered unacceptable by many speakers.
Okay.
And Sue, do you have a word?
Yes, and it's coming back now, and it's popular, or getting to be a popular card game, and it's spelled Canasta.
Yeah, canasta.
Or canasta.
I've never heard this word put into question, so let's just take 2 seconds and look it up in one dictionary, which I have at my elbow, and see if more than one pronunciation is listed.
So, Sue, did you grow up pronouncing it canasta?
Yes, I did.
Oh, I've never heard it said that.
I've never heard that either.
I was thinking it was kind of like a Spanish word, like Casablanca.
Oh, sure.
It is from Spanish.
Or castanets.
Yeah.
It is from Spanish, where, of course, the A would be broad, but be careful, because only one pronunciation is countenanced in this dictionary, and that's with a flat, more English or anglicized A, canasta. And this is what happens with words when they are adopted from other languages into English. They tend to conform to more English ways of pronouncing the vowels.
Do you use a Realtor when you go buy a nuclear reactor? Well, it's Realtor, and it's nuclear. Pronounce the words properly, says Charles Harrington Elster. He's the author of The Big Book of Beastly Mispronunciations. And let's get a couple quick calls in here before Farm Markets. Phil is up next on WHO. Hi, Phil.
Hi, how are you?
What are your favorites?
Two that I may be, who knows, maybe I'm mispronouncing them, but recognize and recognize.
Yeah, recognize.
And then veterinarian.
Yeah.
Veterinarian, whatever. They just
That's good.
Brutal.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, and that reminds me of vets. We have an auditorium here, Charlie, called Veterans Memorial Auditorium. But most people just say veterans. Is that okay?
Well, I can't get too worked up about that. That's something that goes on a lot in the language. It's called syncope.
Yes.
And it's the kind of compression or loss of a sound or syllable in the middle of a word. And so you will hear people say privilege instead of privilege, or perhaps very often chocolate instead of chocolate, and also vegetable instead of vegetable. And so many of these syncopated pronunciations become acceptable, even preferred. You hardly ever hear anybody say, certainly no one younger than about 80 these days, say vacuum for vacuum and diaper for diaper.
But I'm thinking of words like interesting. Interesting is really a 4-syllable word, and family. Family is really a 3-syllable word. I mean, the Flintstones were a modern Stone Age family. They even sang it right in their theme song. Am I being too picky?
You're being a bit too picky, but you have a right to be picky and say it that way. In these cases, I think the one thing you don't have is enough evidence to condemn other people for syncopating those particular words.
No, I'd let the Flintstones do that for me. That's where I base all my language usage, on TV shows, right? As we continue on WHO.
Called December corn is down 1.5 pennies, and November beans are down 1 cent. Gary Wergen with Markets, News Radio 1040 WHO.
Hey, Gary, is it just me, or were you working really hard to pronounce those words correctly?
Gosh, I'm under pressure. Got me scared.
You asked about educate also, and in his book he says it is educate. He said it's not proper to say educate. You do actually say the J sound. So we're both educated.
Well, tell that to my first general manager who beat me over the head and shoulders on things like mercury and Washington and
That's right.
Temperature.
We all go through that, don't we? Thanks, Gary. We continue on News Radio 1040 WHO. And I got to get back to the phone lines here. Everybody wants to talk to this guy. He is the expert, and let's get to Paul next. Thanks for holding, Paul. And what are your examples?
There's no K in et cetera.
Oh, yeah. Et cetera. Et cetera has got a couple different ways, doesn't it, Charlie?
Yes, and there I would say be sure to not only to watch the T in et, and don't say ek, but also pronounce cetera in 3 syllables, not 2.
Yeah.
Don't say etc., but say etc.
That's right. You have another example, Paul?
No X in escape.
Yeah. Escape. I escaped. That's right. And axed is another one. A-S-K-E-D.
An interesting word because it used to be spelled like axe, and the earlier pronunciation, which Noah Webster even advocated as late as the early 1800s, was axe.
Really?
And one of the earliest editions of the Bible wrote it, I think it was Caxton, wrote it, axe and it shall be given unto you. But the word spelling turned around, and of course now it's ask, but every once in a while we hear that vestigial mispronunciation.
Okay, so there is a difference between a word that's clearly right or wrong and a word that just has a preferred pronunciation.
That's right. For example, you said one earlier in the show, realtor is wrong, just as jewelry is wrong and nuclear is wrong.
Right.
All those are beastly mispronunciations. They should be realtor, nuclear, jewelry. And there's no question there in my mind about right and wrong, but then there are many, many words, and I deal with them in the big book of mispronunciation, many, many words where it's kind of a close call, and you need to look at the evidence, and I provide you with, again, diachronic or evidence of authorities' opinions and what dictionaries have recorded over a long period of time so that you can decide for yourself which pronunciation you prefer.
We're going to move on. Troy had another question, but we're going to move on because we have so many callers on the line, and Laura's up next on Michelson in the Morning. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
What
You've
have you
already stolen my thunder on a couple of words.
Okay.
But then I thought about ornery and honorary.
I would call the latter, honorary, just sort of a kind of a regional pronunciation.
Yes.
In some cases, kind of a jocular or humorous pronunciation. Ornery would be the only kind of acceptable standard pronunciation.
Yes, and my husband always says honorary.
Well, I think just to get under your skin.
When I was in 6th grade, and this was a long time ago, I remember my teacher scolding me when I read the word Caribbean. She said it should be Caribbean. Now I hear it both ways.
Interesting.
That's a good question.
Oh, I'm surprised that a teacher scolded. You said it was a teacher?
Yeah.
Scolded you for that. I would have guessed this word would be a candidate for erroneous correction because Caribbean is the newer pronunciation. It arose in the early 20th century. Nobody quite knows where it came from, and some people said it came from jet-setting New Yorkers, which is as good a guess as any. But its origin is mysterious, but Caribbean is the pronunciation with the pedigree and also the one used in the area.
I'm surprised no one's brought up the big pet peeve word, harassment or harassment. That's something that people have intentionally changed.
Well,
but there's an
another
interest. It's got a big history to it, doesn't it?
It's got a huge, long history, which I will summarize very briefly. It's one of the few pronunciation debates, and you're right, it is probably the most hotly contested one. It's one of the few where I say live and let live, because Harris, stress on the first syllable, is older, but not a whole lot older than harass. Both have existed for well over 100 years, probably 150 years at least in American English.
Yeah, but if I had to pin you down,
I would say Harris, but that actually it goes against the dominant tide in America, which is for harass now, whereas the British are still favoring Harris.
Yeah, but the trials we've had the past few years.
They all said it both ways.
Yeah, I mean, it just was back and forth. It got confusing when you'd see Dan Rather saying it one way one night and another way another night, and that's because he didn't want to offend anyone by saying harass.
That's like Jim Lehrer in one of the presidential debates years ago. At the beginning, he said, I think it was in St. Louis or something. In the beginning, he said, "We're in St. Louis, Missouri," and then at the close of the program, he said, "St. Louis, Missouri."
What are common words that people think they're pronouncing properly, but they're really incorrect?
Interesting. I think the greatest sin in this area, when we're talking about people thinking they're paying special attention to pronunciation and giving their pronunciation special care, when they think that they are what we pronunciation experts call cultivated in their meaning that they have put some skill and put some time and energy into developing it like a skill. I think the greatest sin here is what I call pseudo-sophistication, or which goes by the simpler term of affectation.
Yes.
Putting on the dog. And there are a lot of pronunciations that fall into this affected category. I can give you a couple of kind of laughable examples. Dan Rather, the famous newscaster,
Sure.
news anchor, I once heard him say, for the word respiratory pertaining to your breathing, he said respiratory. And that happens to be a British, which is very strange since Dan Rather comes from Texas. Another one you hear very, very often among newsreaders is a kind of phony French soft J sound in the name of the capital for the capital of People's Republic of China. They say Beijing, and that sound doesn't really exist in Chinese, and we shouldn't really say it that way in English. It's just a straight J, Beijing.
What about words like often? Very often I think people that think they're educated, they say often.
Right. Even people who don't have that pretense to education will say often. It's funny. I'm glad you pointed your finger at that word, because that is a pretentious pronunciation that has been criticized by many experts. Among them, one of the greatest experts on usage, most revered, H.W. Fowler. You may know about his Modern English Usage, written back in 1926. And even he said that was a sham-refined pronunciation in Britain in his time, and that people appear to use because they want to sound smart.
So it's often, not often. And
It really is.
I hear two things from what you
said. This is supported by analogy. Christmas, listen, glisten, hasten, all those T's are silent.
But I hear two things in what you say. First of all, language changes. It's very possible that a word that may have been pronounced one way a couple hundred years ago is not pronounced that way today. And second...
That's true.
Second, blame it on the British.
That's very true. Doubly true. Well, it is astonishing to me when I began my investigations into pronunciation some dozen or so years ago, it was astonishing to me to find out, when you look at this subject diachronically, which means across time, historically, a fancy word for historically, when you look at it that way, it is astonishing how many pronunciations have been imported from Great Britain.
Yeah.
I think Americans tend to, and non-Americans also tend to think, American English dominates the world today, and we are exporting all of our vocabulary, hot dog and Coca-Cola and so forth. But that's not always the case. Really, right up through the 20th century, we have been adopting many British pronunciations, and I'll tell you why. I think Americans have never quite gotten over, although Brit would say Americans have never quite got over. We retain the old gotten from colonial days. They've abandoned it, and so language changed for them but stayed the same for us. We have never quite gotten over our uneasiness in terms of culture and refinement.
We still think the British are more
Britain.
Cultured, yes. And
yes, and I think pronunciation is the great battleground of that, and that's why many Americans tend to unconsciously, unwittingly adopt pronunciations have come across the pond.
I'm going to take a couple more quick calls here for our guest, Charles Harrington Elster, the Big Book of Beastly Mispronunciations. And real quick, let's get to Lorna. Hi, Lorna. What's your word?
Hello. I'm a Nebraska native, and I always got blamed for putting the R in washing. Washing,
Yeah. Well,
so
that's
I was always very careful not to do that.
That's good, because you're not supposed to.
My word is M-A-U-V-E. This is an important word to me.
Okay.
It's a color. Is it mauve or is it mauve?
It's the former. Mauve rhymes with stove.
That's mauve?
Correct.
Yes, and how do I convince people that?
Well, buy my book. That's a good start.
Thanks, Lorna. That's a great one. I hadn't known that. And Janet, you get the last word here. Hi, Janet.
Hi. My word is library. I have a lot of kids at school that say library.
Oh, it drives me nuts. Library.
Yeah.
Let's hope they grow up. Let's hope they grow up and grow out of it just the way they grow out of saying Paschetti for spaghetti.
Yeah, it's
but,
library.
But a lot of people don't grow out of it, unfortunately, and you will hear even college presidents and people of that level sometimes say put a berry into library, and it's sad because even though one of the leading dictionaries, Merriam-Webster's 10th Collegiate, has a note about this, seeming to excuse people for saying library, There is no question that educated speakers look down upon that pronunciation.
One of my students told me that there are strawberries and blueberries, but there are no libraries.
That's good.
Good.
I thought it was great.
Charlie, real quick, Des Moines is the name of our city. The host of this show regularly is Jan Michelson. He usually says Des Moines. I've heard Des Moines, and I usually say it Des Moines. What's correct?
Well, you're correct, of course, because you're the host of this show. How could I go against you? No, Des Moines is what I put in my book. There may be some variation with the first syllable, but I would give this much counsel. Be careful about overpronouncing a vowel in an unstressed syllable.
That's very good. His 2 books coming out in September, Verbal Advantage and Tooth and Nail. It's a vocabulary building novel for teens. Look for those along with the big book of beastly mispronunciations.